the trial of the last man, the room was cold and silent. Metal walls rose high like prison bars around a single spotlight. In the center stood a man, the last human. Chains wrapped his wrists and ankles. He did not move. He did not speak. All around him, alien judges sat behind a long, curved table. They wore silver robes and their faces were hidden behind masks. The largest one, known as Prime Arbiter XL, banged his staff on the floor. "The trial of the last human will now begin," Xele said in a deep voice. Hundreds of aliens watched from seats high above. The crowd came from many worlds. Tall creatures with glowing skin, insect-like beings with glassy wings, even gas forms that floated in sealed tanks. They all stared at the human with hate or fear. "You are the final living member of your kind," said Zell. "Your species destroyed planets, broke treaties, and refused to kneel. The Galactic Empire gave you many chances, but you humans chose war. Always war." The man stayed silent. He looked at the floor. "Do you have anything to say before judgment is passed?" Xel asked. Slowly, the man lifted his head. He looked straight at the judges. His eyes were calm but sharp like knives. Then he stepped forward as far as the chains allowed. The guards tensed. Weapons buzzed. Even Exel leaned back. The man's voice was quiet, but in that silence every ear could hear. He said only one sentence. After the words left his lips, a long pause followed. The judges did not speak. The guards froze. Even the crowd in the upper levels went silent. For a moment it was like time itself had stopped. The insect creature judge dropped his staff. The floating gas being began to shake inside its tank. A young alien in the crowd covered her mouth and ran out. Prime Arbiter XL's hands trembled. He looked at the human not with anger, but with fear. "End this trial," he whispered. "Remove the recording. Seal all audio. Now." A light flashed as the courtroom system erased the last 10 seconds of sound from its records. The sentence the man had spoken no longer existed in any file, but it still lived in the minds of those who heard it. The guards moved slowly now, unsure, as they took the man back to his cell. None of them dared look into his eyes. The man said nothing more. He simply walked. Whispers spread fast. Outside the courtroom, messengers flew to their leaders. Private calls were made in dark rooms. The words of the last human were no longer just a sentence. They were now a warning. A warning no one could forget. What had he said? Why did it shake the hearts of beings who had no fear of death? A translator named Relka, who had been sitting in the 4th row, held her chest as she breathed hard. She had heard it clearly, and the meaning behind those words still echoed inside her. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't about war. It was something far worse. Relka looked down at her hands. They were shaking. "How can one sentence do this?" she whispered. She left the courtroom that day and did not return home. The trial was supposed to be the end of the human story, a final act to show the Empire's power. But instead it became the beginning of something new. A shadow began to grow across the stars. Systems that once felt safe now looked to the sky with worry. No one knew if the man had lied, or if his words had triggered something greater. But deep inside, even the most powerful rulers of the Empire now asked the same quiet question. What if he wasn't the last? The sentence they couldn't forget. Days passed, then weeks. But the sentence still lived in the minds of those who had heard it. Even though the Galactic Empire erased the courtroom recordings, even though the media was ordered to stay silent, the words of the last human did not die. They spread in whispers, passed from officer to soldier, from citizen to spy. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew something had changed. The Empire was made of over 1,000 worlds, strong and proud, but now silence walked its halls, like a ghost. Warships remained docked, fleets stopped their patrols, and high council meetings became shorter, tenser. Nobody dared mention the trial, but everyone felt the chill of fear each time the name human was spoken. In the shadows of the capital moon, Relka sat alone in her small living pod. She was just a translator, not a warrior or a spy. But she had heard the sentence with her own ears, and she couldn't forget it. It played in her mind like a song that would not stop, a sentence that meant more than the words it used. The meaning behind it shook her deeply. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise, cold, certain, and filled with something ancient. She remembered how the man had said it so calmly, like he wasn't afraid of death, like he knew death was nothing compared to what would come after. She told no one she remembered the words. Others might want to silence her for it, but deep inside, she knew the sentence would not go away. The galaxy had thought humans were finished. Their last colonies had been destroyed, their armies crushed, their homeworld turned into ashes long ago. The Empire had celebrated its victory with fireworks and parades. They had called the humans stubborn, wild, and foolish. They had mocked them for fighting even when all hope was gone. But now the same Empire trembled, all because of one man's voice. Many tried to guess what he had said. Some believed he had spoken a code that activated hidden human weapons. Others thought he cursed the Empire with ancient magic. But none of those guesses felt right. There were no attacks, no explosions. And yet everything was changing. Ships that left the edge of the galaxy went missing. Colonies stopped responding. Trade routes, once filled with merchant cruisers, became empty and dark. No one could say what was happening, but rumors grew fast. Pirates claimed they saw strange ships in the distance, old human designs, moving, without sound. Mining crews found symbols on dead moons, the same symbols seen in human war flags from the last war. Even in the Empire's heart, strange signs began to appear. Broken security systems, flickering lights, messages written in forgotten human languages. No proof, no clear pattern. But the fear kept growing. Relka could not sleep. She kept seeing the man's face. How calm he looked when the court hated him. She remembered his eyes, not full of anger, not full of sadness, but something else. Like he knew something no one else did. And slowly she began to understand the sentence, not just the words but the feeling behind them. Humans had been beaten, yes, but they had not surrendered. They had vanished into the dark, into the dust of their broken planets, and they had waited. The man's sentence was not about himself. It was a signal, a message to those still hiding, something like a key that opened a door. Not a door of war, but of memory. The Empire had forgotten why it feared humans. It had erased the past, rewritten books, destroyed old records. But humans had remembered, and now, the past was waking up. Relka began to write in secret. She opened old files, searched hidden networks, and traced the path of the human colonies before they fell. And what she found terrified her more than anything else. Entire colonies were not destroyed. They were abandoned, clean, untouched, with signs of sudden escape. It was like the humans had left before the Empire arrived, like they had known the end was coming, like they had planned it. The sentence, she now believed, was part of a larger plan. The last human was not just a prisoner, he was a signal tower, a beacon. And the words he spoke were not for the Empire at all. They were for the others, the ones who had been waiting. And now, the galaxy was beginning to see what it meant to fight something that does not fear death. The Empire had power. It had ships, soldiers, and laws. But humans had something else, a memory, pain, and a hunger that never died. And through one sentence they had returned. The secret of what he said, Relka ran through the rain-soaked alleys of the lower city, her heart pounding harder with every step. She had not eaten in 2 days, barely slept, and now she was being followed. Ever since she accessed the hidden archive, she knew the Empire would not let her walk free. She wasn't important, just a translator, just a face in the crowd. But now she held something dangerous. She remembered the sentence. Not just the words, she understood them. And that made her a threat. The Empire's silence was its first weapon. They buried truth under rules and layers of fear. But once Relka read the message buried in an old human codebook, a dusty, broken piece of data she had stolen from a restricted server, the meaning of the sentence became clear. It was not just a message, it was a map. The words, simple as they sounded, were a cipher. Each word matched coordinates, each pause timed with a signal pattern. She had translated thousands of alien languages, but this one was different. It wasn't made to be understood. It was made to be remembered. By only those who carried the same blood. The sentence was, "We remember the silence. We become the storm." Now she knew what it meant. It was a signal to the remnants of humanity, not just to awaken, but to strike. Not all humans had died in the wars. Some had escaped. Others had vanished on purpose. Those who survived had become legends, hidden in shadows, moving between dead systems. The sentence was a call, not for help, not for peace, but for return. Relka ducked into an old maintenance shaft and slammed the door behind her. Her hands trembled. Someone had been watching her since she left the archives. First a dark figure at the station, then two silent watchers on her street. She knew the Empire's silence teams had been activated. They did not ask questions. They did not arrest. They erased. But she had already sent a fragment of her findings to the outer edges of the network. She didn't know if anyone would read it. Maybe it would be ignored. Maybe it would be intercepted. But part of her hoped the message would reach the right ears. The ears of those who once stood side by side with the last human warriors. Relka thought about the man from the courtroom. The last human. He had no name in the Empire's records, only a number. He was listed as a war criminal, a relic of a fallen world. But the more she studied, the more she realized. He wasn't chosen because he was the last. He was chosen because he remembered. He was a key to the past, trained to hold that sentence until the right moment. And when he spoke it, he didn't do it for the Empire. He did it to unlock something older, buried deep in forgotten space. Somewhere beyond the Empire's charts was a place called Sector Redfall. It didn't appear on any official maps, but it existed in the older records, the ones written before the final human battles. It was described as empty space. Nothing there but broken stars. But Relka found something strange. Reports of silent beacons still active, broadcasting in old human code. No Empire ship had ever gone close. Not after the war. The Empire called. It cursed space. Relka called it something else. The heart of the storm. Now she knew where the message had been aimed. It wasn't meant for the Empire to understand. It was meant for those hiding in Redfall. A signal to rise. Relka climbed, up through a metal tunnel and entered an abandoned tram station. Her breath came in short gasps. The air smelled like rust and smoke. She pulled out her data pad and looked at the message again. The coordinates had been right there in the timing of the sentence, and the sentence had reached its target. As if to confirm her fear, her screen lit up with a ping, unknown source. Old, human frequency. 3 words flashed. Signal received. Moving. Her legs nearly gave out. They were out there. They had heard. And now they were coming. Relka backed away from the screen. Somewhere far above her, sirens began to wail. Security drones filled the skies. The Empire had noticed the shift. Too late. In the shadows of long-dead stars, ships shaped like ghosts moved again. They carried no flags. They answered no hails. They moved in silence. But their weapons were awake, and their mission was clear. The man in chains had spoken just one sentence, and the sleeping children of Earth, those who never forgot the silence, had become the storm. Old ruins and forgotten fears, Relka stood at the edge of a silent world. The surface below her shuttle was covered in gray dust, scattered metal, and long-dead machines. This was Zeros Prime, one of the last known human strongholds before the Empire wiped their kind from history. It had been marked as uninhabitable in official records. No life, no value, no reason to return. But Relka knew better now. The sentence the human had spoken led her here. The ancient code, the signal from Redfall, and the reply she received all pointed to this forgotten place. It was not just a battlefield. It was a graveyard filled with secrets. And if she wanted to understand what was coming, she had to walk through the ashes of what had already been lost. The air was thin, and her breathing mask hissed softly as she stepped from the ship. Old bones lay beneath the dust. Not just human, but alien too. The last war hadn't been one-sided. The humans had bled, but so had their enemies. Tall towers once used for defense now lay broken, pointing at strange angles like fingers reaching toward the sky. In the distance, the ruins of a human city lay silent, half buried under sand and wreckage. Relka walked slowly, her scanner picking up faint traces of power. Some human tech still worked here. Their machines had been built to endure just like them. She followed a weak signal into the city, through a shattered gate and into what once was a command center. The door opened with a hiss, as if it had been expecting someone. Inside, the walls were covered in writing, not just graffiti but messages, short, sharp lines burned into metal by plasma tools. Not words of defeat, but promises. One line was repeated over and over again. If you hear these words, then you have already lost. Relka ran her fingers over the letters. They felt warm even after all these years, like the words still lived. She moved deeper into the room and found a large screen, cracked and dusty. She powered it up. It flickered, then played a single video file. A man appeared, tall, lean, his face half covered by a mask. He wore old human combat armor, scratched and scarred. "If this message is playing," he said, "then they took our voice from the stars, but they didn't take our memory." His voice was calm, just like the prisoners. "We are the silence before the storm. We are the storm after the silence. They can break our cities. They can burn our worlds. But they cannot erase what we are." The screen went dark. No date, no name. Just a final flash of a symbol, the human mark of unity. Relka backed away, her heart pounding. The sentence wasn't just a threat. It was a prophecy. The humans had planned their return long before their last battles. Even in defeat, they had sown seeds of fear. She moved to the lower level of the bunker and found more machines. Most were dead. But in the center of the room stood a large device still humming with power. It was a beacon, ancient but alive, and it was transmitting. Her eyes widened. The beacon pulsed with the same signal she received days ago. It was not calling for help. It was counting down. Relka stared at the screen. It showed a galaxy map with several blinking red lights, locations across the stars. She understood now. Each of those places held a similar beacon, and when the sentence was spoken, they all began counting down. What was at the end of the countdown, she didn't know, but she didn't have long to find out. She downloaded the coordinates and ran back to her shuttle. The skies above Zero's prime were no longer empty. As she lifted off, distant shapes appeared in the atmosphere. Ships, not Empire, but old human war designs. Fast, silent, covered in black armor that shimmered like the void. They weren't attacking. They were watching. Relka didn't know if they had seen her, but part of her hoped they had. Maybe they would know she wasn't an enemy, or maybe it didn't matter. In her hands, she carried something more dangerous than a weapon. Truth. And as her ship escaped the ruins of Zero's prime, she looked back one last time and whispered, "You're not forgotten. The Empire begins to break." The Empire had always ruled through fear. It never needed to shout. Its presence was enough. Ships the size of cities drifted through the stars, weapons charged and always watching. Its law was built on silence, on control, on a belief that nothing could ever threaten its order again. But something was shifting now, something deep and quiet. The kind of fear that couldn't be traced to explosions or fleets. The kind that moved in shadows and left no evidence, only doubt. At first it was small things. Mining colonies at the edge of controlled space stopped reporting. At first the High Council blamed technical errors. Then escort ships vanished on patrol. Elite communication hubs blinked off for seconds, just long enough to panic intelligence officers. Unknown signals were detected in restricted zones, all using outdated human frequencies, ones thought to be extinct. But when an entire listening post disappeared, no distress call, no debris, no warning, the Empire's voice cracked for The first time in 100 years. In their floating fortress above the planet Orvax, the High Council met in secret. Their faces were grim. Behind closed doors they spoke in whispers. Someone even dared to say it out loud. The sentence, "We remember the silence. We become the storm." No one knew what it truly meant, but everyone had heard the phrase. Somewhere. Somehow. It was spreading faster than any official message, spoken in underground bars, scratched into walls, passed in secret files, and everywhere it went, fear followed. Ships assigned to patrol outer sectors refused to deploy. Some captains faked malfunctions to avoid deep space routes. Others quietly resigned. A few disappeared completely. When asked why, they all gave the same answer. We don't fight ghosts. In the capital, the streets felt colder. Soldiers walked in pairs now, eyes sharp, fingers twitching near weapons. Curfews were extended. Surveillance doubled. And yet, even with all their power, the Empire could not stop the feeling that something terrible was approaching. Something they could not see or predict or understand. Relka watched this all unfold from the shadows of a transport bound for a moon called Thalos 9. She had sent fragments of the beacon data to old contacts using broken networks no longer monitored. At first, no one believed her. Then the vanishings began. And now, everyone wanted answers. Too late. She sat, quietly at the back of the shuttle, listening to two traders whisper. They spoke of a convoy that was supposed to arrive 3 days ago. It never did. All 9 ships lost. No wreckage. No call. One of them leaned in and said the words again, soft, like a prayer. We become the storm. Relka closed her eyes. The countdown from Zero's prime still ticked in her pocket. 7 locations across the galaxy, all tied to human ruins, and the timer on each beacon moved together like a synchronized heart, beating louder with each passing hour. She reached Thalos 9 just before curfew. It was a supply world filled with storage yards and forgotten tech. No one paid attention to outsiders here. That was why she had come. The signal she traced led her to a warehouse, one buried under layers of false registration. Inside, she found what she had feared, and what she had hoped. 3 humans, not just survivors. Warriors. They didn't speak much. They didn't look at her with anger or fear, just silent eyes and steady hands. Their leader, a tall man with a long scar down his neck, simply said, "You brought the signal." Relka nodded. He led her to the back of the warehouse. There, under a tarp, sat an old war machine and a dark spiked vessel designed for speed and destruction. Its engine hummed faintly. It was ready. "How many of you are left?" she asked. The man looked at her for a long moment. "Enough." And then for the first time she truly understood. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about reclaiming lost glory. This was about memory. The kind of memory that shaped bones and blood. The kind that survived even when bodies did not. The Empire had thought humans were broken, but they had never understood the truth. Humans did not break. They endured. They vanished into dust only to return as the storm. Far above them, an empire began to fracture, not with sound but with silence. And in that silence, humans were coming home. Whispers of war. The silence before a storm always felt different. To the Empire, it felt like control, like order restored. But to the ones who had listened closely, who had seen the pattern unfolding across the stars, this silence was unnatural. Too deep, too calm. Something was waiting behind it. And that something was not afraid. The Empire tried to deny the growing panic. Messages were sent out from the capital, reassuring citizens that all disappearances were being investigated. Trade routes were said to be rerouted for security improvements. Military presence was increased in core systems, and the news networks were flooded with images of calm leaders and peaceful planets. But truth moved faster than lies. On Station Rexon 12, 3 full squadrons vanished after responding to a false distress call. On the icy moon of Velik, miners found a ship buried in the snow. An old human warcraft perfectly preserved, humming with active power despite being thought destroyed 50 years ago. When Imperial officers boarded it, they found no crew. Only a message carved into the cockpit wall. The storm remembers. Relka was back in orbit, floating aboard a smuggler ship repurposed for deep space. It was small, quiet, and forgettable, perfect for hiding. She and the few human survivors she had met were headed to the last beacon site. The countdown had entered its final phase. The signal pulsed stronger now, reaching systems it had not touched in decades. On board, Relka sat across from the scarred, human leader. He had finally shared his name, Jonas, a name that felt too simple for someone who had seen so much war. His voice was quiet when he spoke, but each word carried weight, like someone who had lost everything and learned to carry the silence. "We didn't want revenge," Jonas said as he checked the ship's nav data. "We wanted time to heal, to remember who we were. But they wouldn't even give us that. So now, we return as a reminder." Relka nodded, her eyes on the window. The stars outside looked peaceful, but she knew better now. They were full of watchers, ghosts in black ships, signals bouncing off forgotten satellites, shadows that didn't belong. Jonas leaned forward. "You've done more than most of us. You helped the signal reach them. I only followed." "The truth," she whispered. "And once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it." Jonas smiled faintly. "That's how it starts." As the ship neared the last beacon site, an old communication array floating in deep orbit around a dead planet. They saw movement, ships, small ones, fast. Not Empire. They moved like birds circling a storm. And in the center, the beacon, glowing brighter than the others. The crew docked carefully. The station was old, covered in dust and damage, but the beacon still pulsed like a heartbeat. Relka touched the panel. The countdown stopped. The signal went silent. "What now?" she asked. Jonas looked toward the stars. "Now, they speak." And far across the galaxy, something answered. On the Empire's capital world, alarms screamed through the sky. Hundreds of signals appeared at once. Ships, thousands of them, uncloaked across multiple sectors. All human, all armed, and not one of them fired a shot. They didn't have to. Their silence was the declaration. The High Council rushed to emergency chambers. Leaders shouted. Plans crumbled. No one expected this. The humans were supposed to be gone, extinct, forgotten. Yet now they stood at the edge of every world, unmoving, unafraid. A message echoed through every Imperial channel. 4 words, spoken in every language. "We are still here." Panic spread. Outer colonies declared independence overnight. Fleets turned back, unwilling to fight. Some commanders defected, saying they would no longer raise weapons against an enemy who had survived everything and returned without rage, only memory. Inside the prison on Delcar 7, the man who had spoken the sentence sat alone. The guards had stopped coming. The cameras were off. The door had been left open for 2 days. But he had not moved, until now. He stood slowly and walked to the hallway, where silence wrapped around him like an old friend. No one stopped him. No one dared, and then as he stepped into the light, he spoke once more. "You lit the fire, now watch it spread." The age of fear, the stars were no longer safe. What began as a whisper had become a wave. The galactic empire, once thought unshakable, was now crumbling piece by piece, not from warheads or invasions, but from fear. A fear planted by one man, watered by silence and grown by memory. Across every system, Empire forces had either gone dark or turned inward. Defense fleets abandoned their posts. High-ranking officers vanished, some defecting, others simply choosing not to fight a storm they could not see. And above it all, the sentence lived. Those 6 words, "We remember the silence, we become the storm," had become more powerful than any weapon. They did not destroy buildings. They destroyed confidence. And when the Empire lost its confidence, it lost its grip on power. In the deep reaches of space, Relka stood aboard a bridge she never imagined she would see. A human command vessel, newly risen from the shadows. Around her, human officers moved with quiet precision, their faces calm, their eyes sharp. They did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They simply prepared. Jonas stood at her side, his expression unchanged. "We never wanted to rule," he said, "but we had to return, because memory is stronger than fear, and the galaxy has forgotten what we are." Relka looked out at the stars. Dozens of ships drifted alongside theirs, black as night, armed but silent. They had not fired a single shot since appearing. Not a single casualty had been reported, and yet entire sectors were surrendering without a fight. "What happens now?" she asked. Jonas didn't answer right away. He pointed to a nearby screen. It displayed communication logs, incoming messages from Empire planets. Some begged for peace. Others offered alliance. A few simply asked one question: "What do you want?" Jonas gave a soft breath, as if he had been waiting years for that question. "We want them to remember," he said. "We want them to teach their children. What happens when you try to erase a people who refuse to die?" And so began the Age of Fear. The Empire, fractured and ashamed, began rewriting its own history. It changed the records, not to lie again, but to finally speak the truth. Textbooks now included the human wars. Museum halls once filled with trophies from conquered human worlds were emptied. Instead, those spaces were left bare, untouched, a sign of respect or fear or both. Human ships never landed on capital worlds. They never sent armies. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough. They were ghosts that no one could touch, not because they were invincible, but because they had learned how to make fear live longer than fire. On distant colonies, statues were raised, not of soldiers, but of empty chairs, symbolizing the ones who had been erased, the ones who had come back. Children were taught the sentence in every language. It became law in some places, ritual in others. And in the old courtroom where it all began, the room remained untouched. No trials were held there anymore. The metal chains once used to bind the last human were left hanging, cold and still. The lights were dim. Only one thing had changed: a single line carved into the center of the floor, deep and clear. Humans do not need armies. They only need a reason. As for the man who had spoken the sentence, he was never seen again. Some believed he returned to the dark sectors, where human fleets still moved in silence. Others thought he had died long before and that someone else had taken his place. But the truth didn't matter anymore, because the sentence was no longer just a man's words. It was now a truth written across the stars, and for the first time in living memory, the Empire was silent, not out of control, but out of respect. Because it understood what every star now whispered: you can erase history, but you cannot erase what remembers you.